Hi, and welcome to the World Networking Podcast, Philosophical Detours number 11. Today, we're going to be discussing the case of the Union Killer and where it led the justice of that day to change our environment of jurisdiction now, and how did it affect the culture of that time. This is the case of Harry Orchard, a man who will soon be put on trial, along with his executive board hiring him to conduct illegal actions on various positions of industry. Now, this was a war in the West in that time. The war between the workers and the labor conductors was a brutal one, and a lot of people ended up losing their lives over the struggles in various workplaces, just over the fact of disagreements in politics. Now, this was no different than these cases. This was a turning point, you could say, in the early 1900s, where in 1906 there was Frank Steunenburg, who was trying to head home to his residence as someone laid a package at his gate and hurried away. Now, Frank opened his gate and ended up being blown up by a bomb and was recovered, brought inside, and ended up passing away due to the wounds shortly thereafter. Now, Frank was supportive of the unions at first, and apparently union lobbyists had essentially gained a rapport with Frank and had seemed to be on good terms with him. But then an incident in 1899 had brought a train full of explosives to a mine, and this mine ended up killing 2 people in the incident, as well as stopping production. Now, this was an incident that was caused by a labor discrepancy, and they needed to distill any violence that was going to occur further. So Frank ended up calling authorities to show up, and the U.S. government ended up sending a bunch of Negro soldiers to the area, primarily Negro, in that time, to instill a sense of jurisdiction in the case. And this pissed off a lot of the union. So the unions formed a hitman to go after Frank. Now, this is a part that they don't know in depth, is if there were other unions involved. So a lot of details with this case were speculative at the end of the day, but we have enough concrete evidence at this point, due to details later to be conferred in this episode. So we will continue this as we dive deeper. Now, Harry was, as we said, the bomber in this case. Shortly thereafter, he was caught as a prime suspect, and they ended up sending 2 detectives to talk to him. And one of these detectives was failing, so they brought the second in. And the second one was this Pinkerton detective. And in that day, this detective was known as one of the best of his trade. Now, let's see here. James McParland was the Pinkerton detective of that time, who ended up heading the case primarily for the prosecution. So he was hired to try to get as much information out of Harry on the bombing as he could. And using tactics of persuasion, he ended up earning Harry's trust. Harry ended up coming clean over his coming to Christ, and he testified in multiple cases during this whole situation that he was involved with multiple cases of bombings along the Northwest, including a case in San Francisco, Oregon, around Baker City, up north in Wyoming and Minnesota, and Idaho, I believe in Colorado, and a few other locations where he traveled, and he had ended up racking up 20 kills, multiple bombings, and various degrees of congregating with board executives on how to best inflict damage on these locations that were disagreeing with the union's demands. So as he revealed this information, he was a prime factor of the case, and the Pinkerton detective ended up pulling his executives on a train from Colorado all the way to Idaho overnight, so the Union can try to keep them in the state away from the jurisdiction of Idaho courts, as by this time the Idaho people were really involved and interested in finding justice for their governor, as they felt he was trying to defend the law overall and just do the right thing to settle the masses. Now, Big Bill Haywood was the main executive of what would be referred to at that time the Western Federation of Miners, and he had other executives on the board with him as well that were being put on trial for these crimes of being conspirators. In the end, he would be proven not guilty, along with his panel, outside of Harry Orchard. Whereas Harry Orchard would be put on a sentence for death initially, to be given a trial of life in prison, where he would spend his days, I believe, until 1956 or 1959, where he would pass away. And he ended up having testimonies saying that he seemed like a truthful man. He seemed friendly in nature during that time after in the prison system. And Big Bill Haywood seemed like the main culprit behind the fabrication of the violence in these incidents. Now, there's a lot of details within the courts that's documented, but overall, the big story between Harry Orchard and Big Bill Haywood that came out was the fact that Haywood tried to defend Harry right away with lawyers and back him up with different groups of unions. Now, one of these groups that started threatening was led by Eugene Debs, and he was a Chicago socialist of that time, who issued a warning to bring 50,000 working men to war with the state of Idaho over the case if they wouldn't petition to let the men, Haywood and his board, to a fair trial, as well as giving a chance to be let out. So he would end up backing down as they came to a gentleman's agreement to figure things out and make this trial happen. Now, at the end of the day, the evidence and the way things were presented, the way the judge worded things to the jury, proved to be enough confusion to the details to land a not guilty verdict unanimously from the jury. Haywood, as mentioned before, would go scot-free, but his legacy has been tarnished over time due to the fact that he caused the death of sheriffs and multiple men that were involved with these cases shortly thereafter, too. So the details and the blood trails that were left, as most things are in the West. If you guys would like to read more about this story, you can pick up the book Outlaws of the Pacific Northwest by Bill Gulick. This is what I've been referring to with some of these stories. There's some obscure facts, things that I haven't quite heard about until my readings of them, and I really enjoyed it. Of course, I paraphrased some of the facts here for the sake of time, and I implore you guys to dive deeper if you're interested in this story, as he really lists out some great resources and details and lists of names of various detectives and organizations that are involved in these cases. I've been enjoying it, and I know you will too. Let me know if you'd like to hear a certain story of the West, and I will look into reading more about it, as this is something I'd love to do more regularly. Historical spotlights are great, and it teaches me a lot about where my culture comes from and the culture of North America. Well, thank you very much, and this has been the World Networking Podcast. See you next time.